Conspiracy theories are most often a smokescreen to divert us from the true evil.
My dad was right. This family's money is dirty.
Imagination is far more fascinating than reality.
Welcome to Working for Uncle Henry, the podcast. I'm the series author and your host, Angela Mullins. I've grown quite fascinated with World War II while writing this series. I've watched more Nazi documentaries than I care to remember, and each one is still fascinating. This chapter kicks off that narrative. Chapter 16. The next few weeks went by with nothing else said about Milan or either of the murders, but Henry had not asked Parker to travel since. Instead, he arranged self-defense classes for Parker with his former military colleague, Hugo. Parker wasn't sure what to expect from his classes. He wasn't looking forward to being thrown around by some big hulking retired SEAL team member. The class was on the top floor of the Performing Arts Center where Edith was a major patron and taught piano once a week. It was a modern design building with lots of windows and metal. Two separate sets of stairs, the last one half as wide as the first, wound upwards to a door labeled Martial Arts. His father would be furious at the exposure to a pagan religion. Parker listened at the door so as not to interrupt anything. Hearing nothing, he eased the door open. Seeing no one, he entered the room. Before he could turn around and survey the room, the door closed behind him, then his knees buckled right before his body flipped over his head and he landed with a painful thud on the wood floor.
"Yes, you definitely need to be here," said a strong, booming voice. "I'm going to teach you how to avoid that."
Parker started to respond, but his breath was floating around somewhere in the room. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast a looming shadow of the body that just attacked him. Finally, he managed to squeak out the word, "Good." Hugo held out his hand to help Parker up. Parker thought better of it. He didn't want to be jerked across the room. He took another gasp of air and rallied himself to his feet. Hugo laughed. Parker took the moment to take in his teacher. Outside of his bald head and tattooed arms, Hugo was not at all the hulking muscle man Parker expected. In fact, he wasn't much bigger than Parker. Slightly bigger build, but a few inches shorter. Although he wasn't the least bit intimidated by looking up at Parker. After all he had to do was throw Parker on the floor again, and the situation would be reversed.
"That's good,"
Hugo said, shaking his finger at Parker.
"You are weak, but not so dumb."
"Thanks," Parker said unappreciatively.
"Lesson number 1.
Hugo declared with his index finger in Parker's face.
Avoid confrontation whenever possible. If you have to hit someone, strike as painfully as possible and run. Car chases and fights are for the movies. If you ever get to that point, you've screwed up."
Parker nodded. "Okay, where do we start?" Hugo stood firm, with his feet wide and his fists on his hips.
"Situational awareness, which you did not have when you walked in this room. I attacked you from behind with ease."
Hugo started by teaching Parker to be more aware of his surroundings and how to detect suspicious behavior.
"Your best weapon are your eyes,"
he said, raising 2 fingers up to his own eyes. Next, Hugo covered evasive techniques, finding exits upon entering a room or place. Parker felt like he was training for covert action and laughed at one point, after which he found himself flat on the floor again. By this time, Parker was ready to learn how to dish out some hurt himself. Getting the right stance to deliver a blow, where to strike, and how to use a tactical pin all came in good time. The tactical pin moves were much more like karate or boxing. Take a stance, strike or block with an open hand, then strike with the pin to the throat, neck, back of neck, eyes, really anywhere.
"When possible, keep striking repeatedly, one place to another."
The thought of attacking another human like that and drawing blood was not appealing, and Parker hoped and prayed he would never have to do it. But those classes were the only thing interesting going on in his life now. Iju was missing in action, not even returning calls or replying to texts. Jennifer was still tied up with fashion weeks. And as much as Parker loved books, even the cataloging had grown old. All of Henry's newly acquired books required a thorough examination, noting their condition. Not that Parker knew how to do that yet, but Henry was teaching him. Parker was also to remove any slips of paper, etc., found in the books and place them in clear file folders. There wasn't a lot of that, but occasionally he would come across a jotted note, phone number, or other series of numbers, which he dutifully placed in the folders for Henry to review later. It was interesting to think what some of the scribblings might have been. A phone number for a new friend, a grocery list, a short note to a special friend. The faded and worn ones were hard to make out. As far as Parker knew, they were just slips of paper people had left in the books and forgotten about. But the books were another way Henry obtained his intel. Clues well hidden in the code of a grocery list worked well from time to time. While the collection contained some interesting titles and authors, most of them seemed more obscure than valuable. Parker wondered why Henry had acquired some of them and who he thought might buy them. But that wasn't his concern. He had enough unanswered questions on his list. Henry's business was apparently successful, so who was he to question that? On this particular day, Henry had unboxed a new acquisition, a large leather-bound album. It reminded Parker of an old family Bible at his grandparents' house. The leather around the spine and edges was worn and ragged, the pages graying.
No doubt you are aware of the art looting and theft that took place during World War II,
Henry began. Parker nodded.
It was so extensive that Goebbels and others created catalogs detailing the stolen art for Hitler to pick out what he wanted for his museum. This is one of them.
He eased open the book and turned a few of the weathered pages. Its expanse almost covered the work table.
I need you to photograph all the pages so we can give them to the Art Loss Registry. Once we're sure all the photos are clear and discernible, we'll ship this baby off to her new owner.
Henry left Parker to his work. For some time he stared at the handwriting, all in German, of course, and wondered what infamous character may have meticulously, as Nazis were known to be, recorded all the information. Finally, he grabbed the camera and set about snapping photos. Page after page of photographs, most of them black and white, and pertinent information on the stolen items was listed. So many people's prized possessions snatched away from them, some portraits of family members. One particular painting caught his eye. The caption read, Boulevard Montmartre, Twilight by Camille Pissarro, 1897. He couldn't stop staring at it. Parker was sure he had seen it somewhere. But if he had, it had to be a reproduction, right? He studied the painting a while longer, then put the book away and called it a day. He texted Iju again to see if he wanted to meet up at the rec room to hang out. After a few moments of no reply, Parker drove his motorcycle back to the estate. He barely noticed the bike sputtering and spitting all the way because he couldn't get the image of the Pissarro painting out of his head. Where had he seen it before? He parked his bike in the garage and made a mental note to check the carburetor again, then went straight inside to the parlor. There it was, hanging over an antique Louis XVI Marquetre marble-top commode. He switched on the light and strode right up to it. A colorful, but blurry, he thought, parade of carriages and people down a tree-lined street. As far as he could tell, it was the same painting as in the book. He dared to touch it, to feel the brushstrokes. And there in the bottom left, in black, was the name Pissarro. "Are you studying art now?" Jennifer asked with an air of amusement as she entered the room. She held an amaretto sour in one hand while the other arm hung elegantly at her side, her hair now cut in blunt bangs that covered her brow. She wore a form-fitting teal short-sleeved turtleneck and equally fitting black satin pants with matching teal swirls. The 3-inch heels of her boots put her eye to eye with her cousin. Parker turned with a start. Hi. When did you get here? A couple of hours ago. She walked closer. What are you doing? Parker blushed a little. Why did he keep feeling like he was doing something he shouldn't? This painting, he said, jabbing his finger excitedly toward it. I saw this painting in a book I audited today. It was stolen during World War II. It's turned up a few times since, but nobody knows where it is now. Maybe this is it. Hopefully Henry won't let you do any art buying. What do you mean? Well, first of all, you should do your homework. That is one of several paintings Pissarro did of the same street at different times of the day and year. Are you sure you're looking at the same one that was in the book? Well, unless the others are the same picture, this is it. I know it is. What if I told you that was a forgery? Jennifer asked calmly. What? A forgery? But it has the signature and everything. Well, forgeries usually do, and they can be quite sophisticated. Besides, Edith is very good. He squinted in confusion. Are you saying Aunt Edith painted this? All the famous paintings in the house are copies. If we weren't already rich, Edith could have made us rich as a criminal. She painted everything in the house, even your stolen Picasso crayon piece. Parker didn't figure that was much of a challenge to copy. Yeah, speaking of that, why didn't you tell me it was a fake and you had the real one? Did I? Henry said you did. You didn't know? I never peek at what Henry gives me, and I never ask questions. Parker sighed and shook his head. Apparently I was a decoy. He hasn't let me go anywhere since, either. Has me taking self-defense classes. With Hugo? Yes, she said with a sly smile. You too? Well, my lessons were probably different, she said with a hint of innuendo. Parker frowned. So, who is Raphael? Jennifer strolled across the room to gaze at a painting on the opposite wall, a colorful Monet garden scene. Parker watched her, waiting for an answer that eventually came after an awkward silence. He was my mother's lover. Now he's mine. Parker cleared his throat. Okay. How does Aunt Vivian feel about that? Jennifer shrugged. Oh, by the time she found out, she was ready to move on. She pretended to be upset to make us feel guilty. He was never going to marry her anyway. He's not the marrying type. And that's what she wanted. Husbands come and go, but Chanel is forever. That's Mother's motto. So, he's your boyfriend? She turned back to him. I don't do boyfriends. I met Raphael when I was 17. I had just finished school in Lucerne. Mother lived in Paris at the time. He was there. We decided we liked each other. I'll spare you the rest of the details. Thanks. He was relieved not to hear any more. So, what about Qatar? Oh, and he's dead, by the way. Did you know that? Who? She replied, turning back to the Monet. Dat Qatar, New Year's Eve? The man you... Never mind. I don't understand you. And I don't understand you, she said, turning back with glaring eyes. You're a good-looking guy. You could have whoever you want, whenever you want. He stared at her incredulously. She moved closer. He could smell the alcohol on her breath. Maybe even me, she said, delicately stroking his cheek. Parker jerked his head away. Jennifer, stop. Oh, come on, Parker. Can't we just be friends and not care about each other's lifestyles? Parker hung his head mournfully, then glanced back at her. I don't think I can not care about you. Jennifer watched Parker leave the room, pondered his comment for a moment, then turned her attention back to the Monet. "There you are," Edith said gleefully. She strolled over and put her arm around Jennifer, giving her a warm, welcoming squeeze. "Monet is my favorite," Jennifer mused. "No hidden messages, no agenda, nothing complicated, just pure beauty. He painted what he saw." "Yes, I quite agree, dear. I'm so glad we were able to acquire this one." Over the next several days, Edith tended to her charities of painting and music at the museum and the Performing Arts Center. Henry was either buried in a book or some kind of complicated formula, popping in at the Mercantile once a week and making his weekly trek to Langley Air Force Base. Jennifer spent her days practicing yoga by the pool and her nights with a few of the locals. Parker continued his work at the Mercantile, hanging out with Iju, who had reappeared among the living, and getting more and more comfortable with life at the estate. The one thing he preferred not to spend time on was keeping his bike in repair. But he was glad to have a covered, warm, and well-equipped place like the Archer garage to do his tinkering. It sure beat working in the cold or the rain. One day, he planned to have a more dependable ride, and maybe even a new one now that he was able to start putting a little money back each month. But for now, he'd keep repairing the Kawasaki. It was time for a new drive chain, but years of frugality had him still trying to stretch every mile he could out of this one. He bounced his finger on the chain to check for slackness. Yep, too loose. He made the needed adjustments. The dirt roads around the marshes where Iju lived had made a mess of the chain. Parker sprayed degreaser over it and scrubbed the road debris off onto the drop cloth he had placed underneath. As he finished lubing up the chain, the garage bay door at the other end quietly raised. A sleek silver Aston Martin glided into its space. Jennifer got out and walked around to the cabinet on the wall to put away her fob. The confident click of her boots across the tile floor moved in Parker's direction. "Why are you always taking that thing apart?" she asked, shaking her head. Parker smiled. "No, I'm not taking it apart. It's just a little overdue on some maintenance." "Why don't you just buy a new one?" "Yeah, right. Henry pays me well, but I'm still paying off college loans." "Why?" she asked with a puzzled look. Parker returned her puzzled look. "My family doesn't have the money the rest of you have, you know." "Yes, you do." He narrowed his eyes at her. "Well, you may not have the same investments we do," she continued, "but you have a trust fund, just like I do." "Trust fund?" "You don't know, do you?" "I don't know anything about a trust fund." "Grandfather left us all well provided for. He set up trust funds for all his children and grandchildren. Your mother never told you." Parker took a deep breath. "I doubt my mother was behind keeping it a secret," his voice tense and edgy. How much?" "I don't know. It changes, mostly going up. I don't know what it's invested in or where it came from, but it's nice," she said with firm satisfaction. "You should talk to Henry." She walked to another key cabinet and took out a key fob. "In the meantime, take that one." She pointed to a silver Porsche and tossed Parker the key. He stood up to verify where she was pointing. His mouth fell open. Are you serious? Have you ever known me not to be? Take it. Keep it. I haven't driven it in months. Consider it a gift. Maybe this one won't get you into trouble." She grinned. "Now, I have to go change. I have a party to go to." Parker stared at the fob in his hand, emblazoned with the Porsche coat of arms, then back at the car, a car he could only have dreamed of owning. All his life he watched his parents juggle money, scrape to buy something special, pray earnestly for God's provision when things got tight. God always came through by some church member or anonymous source. They never went without what they truly needed, but apparently God had provided far more. They could have helped other people instead of people helping them. They could have supported missionaries far, far more than they did. Why had they ignored Samuel Archer's legacy? What did they, or maybe it was just his father, find so repulsive about the Archer money?
Trust fund?
He said through clenched teeth. He kicked the can of lubricant, causing the drop cloth to flip and scatter its gunky debris onto the floor, and stormed out, too mad and distracted to even notice the mess. Thanks for listening. If you're interested in knowing more about the Nazis' art theft and forgeries and art mysteries in general, you'll find some links in the show notes. And let me know what you think about the podcast in the comments and share it with a friend.